So my name is Daniel. That's my academia.edu page if you want to go and find out a little bit the kind of things I have been doing. And I'm your course leader. So I've been here I've been here 2 months in CSI. Hi. So far I've been here 2 months, and it's been absolutely great. It really is a wonderful place to work and to study. And I really think maybe the best place in the world at the moment, and I'm not even saying it lightly or as an exaggeration, but perhaps the best place in the world to do creative work, because it sometimes happens that some forces come together in a certain way and create something new. And after a while, the same forces are in place, but the new doesn't happen. And if you look at life, you see how sometimes, revolutions happen, and then for a long time, things are more or less the same. There is a quite famous model of a way of thinking about the way science progresses. Kuhn is the person who coined this concept of a paradigm shift. And I'm going on a tangent, but it will happen many times in the future as well, so it might get useful. So Kuhn, the philosopher of science, coined the term a paradigm shift. And he said, well, generally science develops in a very linear fashion as an evolutionary. Things are added bit by bit and knowledge grows, but occasionally certain forces come together and then a revolution happens. Like then Copernicus comes and suddenly we don't think anymore that sun is rotating around the earth. The whole paradigm is shifted. The whole concept of astronomy and of the place of the human in the universe is turned around. We realize that no, it's the earth moving around the sun with all the astronomical, physical, philosophical, religious consequences. This is a paradigm shift. Yeah? Or then, for instance, Newton notices the gravity field, and there is another paradigm shift. Or Einstein discovers relativity, and suddenly the Newtonian universe is turned on its head, and again we are in a different universe. And between these big kind of revolutionary moments, there are gradual evolutionary little steps that increase knowledge, but from time to time there is like an explosion, and we come to a new place. Something similar also happens in art. Yes, so for instance, for a long time people do representational painting, and they get very good at painting beautifully portraits and objects and landscapes and interiors, and they get better and better and better at it. And at some point there is a kind of explosion, and suddenly people are interested in something else, and then Impressionism happens, and Surrealism happens, and Cubism, and modernity happens. Now, we are now in a moment of this kind of paradigm shift. I don't know if you feel it in your bones. I don't know if you see it around you every day when you wake up in the morning or before you go to sleep. But I feel it. I feel that we live in this moment of rapid, accelerated shift. And this shift is not technological, but it's also not completely outside of technology. This shift I'm talking about is a deep cultural shift. And it is also a deep shift in the way we see the world in our own eyes, but also through art. It is a kind of, the whole paradigm of art and how we imagine the world and how we imagine ourselves in the world and how imagination works and how images work, everything is kind of changing. Now, we'll talk later about why that happens, and what might be the reasons for that. In a sense, that is even less important than just acknowledging that we are at a kind of moment where everything is up for grabs, where all old strategies of making images, of being an artist, of being a photographer, they don't seem to be enough anymore. They don't seem to capture a sufficient amount of the world around us. You just feel that old strategies just keep narrowing down the field you can capture through them. So if you stay with the old strategies, your view keeps shrinking until it just goes to a tiny point. So you need a different set of tools to really make sense of what is happening right now. And it is my impression that Central St. Martin's at this moment is a place that understands this shift and actually is gearing up to address it. And you notice it. You notice that people around are supportive. People kind of understand it on every level, from the lecturers to the administrators to the people who do the marketing aspects of this university and the finances and the outreach programs. You realize people are looking at various ways to grasp the present moment. Yesterday I was at a meeting with some people from marketing, and we met with a couple of guys from two big media companies. One, I cannot name any names, but one of them is production company for music and video, and the other is an open source software company. And they came to St. Martin's because they want to figure out a grant application, something in the range of about £250,000, to apply for Arts and Humanities Research Council and NESTA, which are big funding bodies, to try and figure out what is happening with art in this kind of changing digital environment. And so they came to us. And I think one of the reasons, and they are commercial companies. At the end of the day, they're very interested in a profit, but they also understand that Central St. Martin's is a place that keeps its finger on the pulse of what is happening in a very particular way, and there is something here happening, thanks to you, thanks to the energy you bring to this place, that really gives us a chance to figure out what is going on right now. And so we are at a kind of quite precious moment where things are possible, when change is possible, when if you come with a new idea, people will not tell you, oh, don't do that, old ways are best. No, people will say, great, run with it. We will support you, we'll find you the resources, we'll find you the training, we'll bring together the people who will allow that to happen. This is quite rare. An opportunity like that might not happen in one's lifetime for the second time. It might happen as well. I don't know. Maybe this state of change will last, for eternity. But I doubt it. It is very possible that after a short while, things will settle down. We will learn how to live with this bifurcated environment, divided between physical life and digital life, between analog and digital, between screens and tables. We will kind of learn how to live with it. It will become comfortable. We will forget that it's kind of somehow weird, and things will settle down into a certain routine. But for now, it's all very strange. It's all very different, and it creates a certain energy. So for that reason, I think Central St. Martin's is a great place to be right now. Somehow, even the design of this building, you see, takes on board this understanding that the university itself is a new creature. Because, the way this building is designed is not your usual university building. All of you been to probably universities or schools of art in the past. And so have I. And, you know, we are very used to walls and doors and offices, and you close the door and you are in your little space and you go to the corridor, you meet colleagues. Here, even the design of the building is completely different. It's conductive to influences. It's glass and wood, and whatever you think about the aesthetics of that, it creates a kind of sense of transparency. There's not a single place in this building where you can talk in a way that will not be heard by someone else. Whether it's good or bad is kind of besides the point, but it's interesting. It is interesting that the idea is that it is a kind of almost like a network, almost like the web that we encounter when we go online. It's almost reimagined in the architecture, in the architectonics of this building. Yeah. So even on this kind of on the very minute level of design and architecture, you see that there is a kind of attempt to do something new. And when institutions try to do something new, it often doesn't work, you know, and it often doesn't last. But now it's happening. And when I was talking to the first year students on the first day of the semester, which was already more than a week ago, I was telling them that my experience, so sorry for repeating that, a little brief. My experience of working in Central St. Martin's, my first impression was that it's like being in CERN. You know CERN, the physics, the European physics laboratory with the collider, with the what's called what's it called? Yeah. When they spin these photons and make them hit each other at incredible speeds to try and capture the moment of the kind of the first milliseconds after the Big Bang. You know, so it's a kind of a massive experimental laboratory which is based on a photographic model, but that's kind of besides the point, where they try to go and create an image of the universe just at the moment of its birth. And Central St. Martin's at the moment is this kind of laboratory where you feel that all the energies are directed towards trying to figure out what is the place of art in contemporary culture, in the contemporary moment. So this is kind of, for us, it is a call to arms. It is a call to arms. It is also an indicator that things are possible, you know. And it's great. It's great to be a student here. It's great to do an MA in this moment, because I think the MA is maybe the most exciting part of the whole academic career. And I've been through it, you know, from undergraduate to a doctor. So I know the stages. I think being an MA student is really quite special. It is the most open-ended and experimental part of this path. Once you finish the MA, you're really quite focused on a certain project and you work towards your PhD. And before, when you do the BA, you very much just do what you're told. But in the MA moment, you are free, you know, and you need to use this freedom. You need to really grab this opportunity. Okay. So today's conversation or lecture will be made of two parts. The first part is called How One Becomes a Master of the Universe or of your own practice. The second part is about the latent image. The two parts are connected, but maybe not in a very obvious way. And we will have a break in between. So I guess each one of them will be around an hour. And in the first part, I really want to talk to you about what does it mean to do an MA, or in other words, what does it mean to be or to become a master? Because I think it's quite important. I think very often people just go into something like that without really asking what it means, and then it might be difficult to understand the level of requirement or the level of achievement required in order to be a master. So, before I start, feel free to interrupt and ask questions at any point. Sometimes I don't pronounce words very clearly. Sometimes my concepts are quite muddled, so please ask, and I'm happy to have a conversation. It doesn't need to be a kind of lecture. Also, if you don't agree with something, you're welcome to shout, jump, throw something. Not very hard, but I don't encourage violence. But you can draw attention to yourself if you think something is wrong, or I don't want you to be kind of passive observers here. I want to provoke you. I want to involve you in a kind of way of thinking. So maybe even before I go into the whole master thing, I will tell you just a couple of things about what I was doing recently. My book just came out, On the Verge of Photography, and I'm quite proud of it, I have to say. It's really strange to see something you've been kind of keeping in your head for 2 years appearing as a finished object. It is quite a sensation. So, and it's strange that, with all this talk of the digital and the analog and all these transitions, there is a certain satisfaction in having a book. Also these days, personally, I always prefer a file to a physical book. But it's nice to hold it. It has a certain weight to it. Books are heavy things. When I got 20 copies and I was carrying them home, I thought, God, it would be so much easier if I just had it on my iPad And the next step is that I need to convert the InDesign file into a Kindle document, because I want to put it on Amazon and to help the publisher do it. You realize when you go through the process of a book production, you need to do everything yourself. Or at least you need to be able to supervise everything. You need to be able to understand what the designer wants to do in typography. You need to be able to color correct the images. You need to kind of figure all of these things for yourself. Otherwise, it just goes haywire. And it is part of this situation we are in. Even this distinction between professions are completely muddled. In the past, you would have experts in different things: a typesetter, a graphic designer, typographer, printer, writer. Now it's all just one thing, and you need to be able to do all of these things and do them very quickly. And it's the same for a photographer as well. You need to know the moving image, you need to understand sound, you need to understand file formats to be able to work in Photoshop, in After Effects, maybe to do some programming, to understand the web, to understand social media. All of that is photography. And that's even before we speak about the philosophical, theoretical, critical considerations. So I was doing this book, and it took quite a long time. And I'm also editing a journal. It's called Philosophy of Photography, and it's coming out twice a year. I'm going to get it to our library soon. And when I set it up, that was 5 years ago, people were saying, why philosophy of photography? The question was, why photography needs philosophy? And that's a very interesting and important question. Why photography needs philosophy? I mean, isn't photography quite a simple, straightforward thing? You point the camera at an object, the shutter opens, light enters the chamber of the camera, exposes the film, the shutter closes, you develop the film, and that's the image of what was there in front of the camera at that moment. So that is all pretty self-explanatory. Why do you need philosophy? I mean, well, you also have philosophy of cooking, philosophy of dishwashing, of driving, you know. So it's interesting to me that question, that the people were asking this question, and really sort of genuinely, maybe slightly provocatively, wondering what is so philosophical about it. Of course, as we will see, it is impossible to do photography without philosophy. Even those people who say you don't need a philosophy because because a photograph is simply a transparent representation of reality, that is already a philosophical statement. That is already captures a certain philosophy about representation and some kind of truth that can be captured by an image. So I'll come back to some of these questions about truth and the image a bit later on. But
I don't know if you're aware, but you know Michael Gove, the Minister for Education?
yes.
He said recently that he wanted to try and get rid of all the useless degrees.
Which degrees?
Useless.
Useless degrees. Yes.
He said, for example, why would anyone need to do a degree in photography?
Yes. Well, I think that's a fair, that's a good example, and it is also quite telling. You know, yeah, it is. Photography is maybe the most useless degree, and probably philosophy is another example of a very useless degree. In a sense, you know, anything to do with the human spirit is more or less useless. However, without these useless things, life might very quickly become a little bit monotonous, or maybe slightly instrumental. Yeah, I don't want to talk about Michael Gove, but that was a very good interjection, Valerie. Thank you. So let's go to the two projects I was working on recently, and I hope you will get involved in the journal. We publish essays, we publish articles, we publish portfolios. We are interested in everything that questions photography and tries to find out how photography works in the world, how it captures the world, how it changes the world, how it acts. And I'm also involved in the Arts and Humanities Research Council grant that I got about a year and a half ago to set up an international network of research. That's the long title of this project is the application of non-representational theories to the fate of the photographic image online. But what it really means is somehow trying to bring the thinking about photography a little bit in line with contemporary philosophical thought. The whole idea behind it was that somehow there is a complete disconnect between where philosophical concerns are now in the present moment and where photography theory is. And my feeling was that they are wide apart, and this project is really trying to bring the two together, somehow to bring thinking about photography and the practice of photography a little bit closer to kind of the most interesting developments in contemporary thought and art practices. Just to get to get philosophy to learn from photography as much as to get photography to learn from philosophy. Because in my thinking, philosophy and photography are not even two separate entities. They are just one thing. I see photography as the visual manifestation of thought. Thoughts manifest themselves in writing as philosophy or as poetry or as prose, and thoughts manifest themselves visually as images in painting, in sculpture, in dance and photography. Because our art is the extension of our bodies. You know, that's what art is. And it's interesting, you know, today, this morning, and somehow it always happens to me, before a lecture, it never fails, it's amazing. Whenever I have a lecture to give, when I switch the radio on in the morning, I usually listen to Radio 4, there is something there that speaks directly to my subject. It's just, you know, the universe is built in a mysterious way. But you will find, once you write your dissertation, once you work on your project, everything around you will speak to your subject. Once you know what your project is, everything, when you switch the TV on to watch the news or a game show, everything will speak to what you do.
And it's just your body pull out from the universe that highlights what you need.
Exactly. Yeah. Because, you know, that's exactly the basis of all prophecy, of all religious prophecy. Once your mind is focused on something, you just see that. So anyway, I was listening today on the radio, and they had the little item, what is the purpose, what is the point of art? So they brought two guys. One of them is Alan de Bolton. I don't know if you know him. He is a real caricature of a philosopher. Don't tell anyone. But he is he's a well-meaning guy, and he wrote quite a few bestsellers. But he was talking about the purpose of art. And there is another man whose name I forgot, and he wrote a book about kind of art from an evolutionary perspective. So they basically both were saying something like, well, Alan de Bolton was saying, art brings some beauty into our lives, which are quite chaotic. Art reminds us that there are some beautiful things. Art gives us comfort. So we turn to art, you know, like as a kind of plaster you put on a wound, basically. That was his idea of art. It reminds us that, you know, there are some beautiful things. And I think, God, this is just such rubbish. And then the other one was saying something very similar, basically how, you know, from very early days of humanity, you know, beauty was really important, and also the collecting instinct, and people were like looking for sort of stones that have a little shape on them and collecting them, you know, even before people started to paint, to do cave paintings. And I thought, this is just so, it just amazes me how little people understand about art. It's really, it always never fails to amaze me. Art is not about that. At least that's how I see it. Because both these approaches, they see art as a kind of, as a sort of cherry, you know, as a kind of decoration, or maybe as a sort of sleeping pill or a painkiller you take because, you know, life is so horrid. You take a painkiller, oh no, now it's better. You know, you watch something and you on the telly and you feel so much better. But you know, that's not what art is. If that was the case, why would we be sitting here? Why would we be sitting here today? Why would I be wasting my life thinking about these things? Why would you be, you know, working day and night on your projects, on your own art? You know, to give someone a painkiller, I mean, that is completely pointless. The reason art is so important and so central to our lives, and, you know, to the world is that art never keeps amazing. Art never keeps surprising us. It never keeps reminding us that something different is possible. When we turn to art, we kind of always face the possibility of being surprised. And that reminds us that life has the potential to surprise. That is the real hope. In art, we see that the existing order of things is not necessarily the only one. That another order is possible, another logic is possible. So let's have a look at this for a second. Do you know this painting? It's strange how there's so many screens at once. It's really one of my favorite paintings. It's Lorenzo Lotto, Lotto, Lorenzo Lotto, and it is. It's called it's the Annunciation. Yeah, obviously, Annunciation, and it's called the Recanati Annunciation because it is in Recanati in the Pinacoteca, in an Italian town, Recanati. Lotto is a 15th century Venetian school, contemporary of Titian, but he never kind of made it in Venice, so he was traveling throughout Italy painting, because the traditional kind of the religious painting. And I think, I just brought it up because I was talking about art as having the potential to surprise. Now, I don't know how well you know Renaissance art, but you probably, even if you just go to the National Gallery, you see hundreds of Annunciations. It's one of the most standard, kind of bog standard subjects of Renaissance painting. And the Annunciation is the moment in which the angel, Gabriel, I think, comes down to tell Mary that she will be the mother of God. So there's loads and loads of every church has an Annunciation of its own. And one of the most amazing things of kind of traveling in Italy is that no matter what tiny church you will walk into, it will have some really remarkable art that normally generally no one even looks at. So hundreds of painters made these really competent, wonderfully painted Annunciations. And then once in a while, someone comes, takes this same subject, the same technique, and does something completely remarkable, outstanding with it. I don't know if you can even, I don't know if you probably see that. I find this painting astonishing. Because, well, first, because as I was saying, art is there to remind us that something else is possible. And you have this kind of guy with a beard flying in a cloud. And it really is possible that that's how Lorenzo Lotto imagined God. But I don't think so. I think really it says that you don't need to be bound to the rules or the logic of gravity. You don't need to have your feet on the ground. That doesn't look to me at all like God. It just looks like a person flying. Maybe on drugs or something. Or maybe just flying. Why not? Why couldn't someone fly? Around this time, Leonardo was inventing flying machines without any ability to build one. He drew a helicopter. Yeah, as everyone knows. So I think Lorenzo Lotto says, yes, you can fly. You don't need to be bound to this logic of heavy bodies. You can, if you want, you can fly. And that's, 500 years before flight became a reality. So that's one thing which is completely astonishing here. And the other is, of course, Mary, because in this moment, when this guy says, "It's you," and the angel kind of tells her, "Get up, you are the chosen one." She turns to us and she says, "I don't know this." And I think this is just so. I never saw any annunciation in which we, the viewers, so much become not only the witnesses, but really part of the situation. It's us she is turning to, not to Gabriel, not to the bearded guy, to us. And she says, "I don't want that. Help me." And this is just stunning. And, of course, another thing which is really stunning is the cat. Now, how good is that? No? How good it is to draw this cat in such a... He really, I think he understood cats so well. In this kind of... because the cat senses this specter. There's something not right. And cats are very sensitive to when something is, even the tiniest thing, if you change in your house, if you have a cat, you know what I'm talking about. You just change a tiny thing, you put a cushion in the wrong place, and the cat goes, "Oh, I don't like that." It's because they need to know exactly where everything is. That's how their instinct operates, out of complete familiarity with every object. And it senses something deeply outwardly, unfamiliar. Lorenzo Lotto. So, that's what I mean. This is not about comfort. This is not about a plaster or a painkiller. That really is to show us that something else is possible, And to me that also kind of what photography should aim at. That's the level at which art becomes meaningful. Adorno, who is a very interesting philosopher from the he wrote between 1930s and 1960s. He has a book. It's called Aesthetic Theory. At some point we will read a little bit from it. And the whole book is really trying to figure out the role of art in contemporary society. He wrote it after the years of Nazi Germany, and he escaped Germany to the States, but his good friend, his best friend, Walter Benjamin, did manage to escape, and as you probably know, committed suicide on the border between France and Spain, escaping the Nazis. So in this book, Aesthetic Theory, Adorno tries to figure out what is the role of art after Auschwitz. And I don't know if you're probably familiar with this expression because that's one of the most famous statements attributed to Adorno. He said, "Poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric." You heard that? No. Poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric. Now, people often take that to mean that you cannot write poetry or you cannot do art after Auschwitz. But that's not exactly what he is saying, because you really need to read the passage to put the things in context. What he means is that representation is barbaric. There is a kind of intimate connection between representation and fascism. We will elaborate on that later on. But in aesthetic theory, Adorno also says, he says, art does not need to defend itself against the accusation that it is degenerate. Because if you know, the Nazis basically labeled most of modern art, abstract art, degenerate. And while they collected it and made a lot of money from it, they also banned it because it looked very much like, sort of, let's say, Stalinist Russia. They felt threatened by modernism. Yeah. Precisely because modernism challenges the familiar representational paradigms. So Adorno says that art does not need to defend itself against the accusation that it is degenerate. Art sticks. What art is doing is insisting that another order, another logic is possible. And in so doing, art rejects the wretched, the rotten system or order in which we find ourselves. Yeah? So the role of art, according to Adorno, is to keep reminding us that there is another way of living, there is another way of being, and that you can fly if you want. It's also interesting that you can almost see in this painting how this 15th century Italian artist really wants to paint abstract. He cannot, because there is no philosophical aesthetic model that will allow him to live representing people like people and cats like cats. But in this figure of God flying there in the sky, looking just like a normal guy, you really see the desire to break away from representing, to go to another level. And I think that a lot of what we consider today religious art is in some way attempt to get away from representation. Because while artists always had to do representational paintings, mostly for commercial reasons, what art really is interested in is not in showing you, this is a bottle and this is a object, but in trying to figure out what does it mean to look, what is an image, and what does it mean to paint. These are the real questions that interest an artist. You see that, for instance, when you look at Matisse, for whom, the possibilities of his moment were such that he could paint the painting itself, paint the act of painting itself. Okay, so what all that has to do with being a master? So sometimes people think that MA is a kind of continuation of the BA. In the BA, you had to do 3 years and perform a number of tasks. On the MA, you do another 2 years of your sentence and do another number of tasks. And once you finish, you get your degree. No, it's completely wrong. Don't think like that. On the MA, you become a master. You become a master of art in photography. Yes, so even we just take the master just for a moment. What does it mean to become a master of anything at all? You need to think about it. What does it mean to master something?
To be confident in the field, in the area. Even if you don't know how to do it, you still kind of confident so you can progress while you're doing it. So it's just, you can go over the borders, because your ideas go pushing you, and you're confident enough to explore it.
Well, you're right that it is about confidence. You're right, it is about confidence, yes. I would say even more than confidence, it is about authority. Control, I'm not sure I don't know, control is something slightly difficult here. I would say authority. To be a master is to have authority. What does it mean to have authority in anything at all? For instance, you have
something to say that's worth listening to.
Well, you have something to say, but it's not enough. You also need to say it in a way that people will listen. Yeah. Now, if a person will walk into this room, or let's say if I walk into a room with someone sitting there behind the desk, and they will tell me, "Take all your clothes off," why would I do that? I will tell him, well, fuck off. But if this person is wearing a white overcoat and carrying the stethoscope around their neck, and their name is saying Doctor something, I probably will do that. Yeah? Because I will feel that they have the authority. Yeah? And all that changed is an overcoat, a tag with a name, and a stethoscope. That's it. I mean, does it make sense? It does make sense on some level, but there is also another level at which it's completely artificial. You need to know how to be artificial. You need to know how to create the impression of authority, even if it means wearing a white overcoat and a stethoscope around your neck. Yeah? Authority is a very tricky thing. Some people can walk into a room and tell a room full of people what to do, and everyone will do it. And then someone else will come and say the same thing, and people will remain seated. If you remember your days in school, you probably remember that some teachers had authority, and some didn't. And you could do with them whatever you wanted. And then there would be another teacher who walks into the class, and suddenly everyone is quiet. Why? Because they were masters. They could master the students. So you will become a master when you will know how to have authority. Yeah? And authority is not necessarily being an expert. It's not necessarily about knowing everything about your discipline. Going back to the example of the doctor, it's very interesting how a training in medical school happens. You know what? One of the first things that happens when you start in a medical school is that they give you, in the first year, they give you the white overcoat, they give you a stethoscope, they take you on the tours of the hospital wards, they teach you how to behave like a doctor, even before you learn the names of all the bones and the diseases and the medicines. Yeah? They teach you how to behave like a doctor. The same, for instance, in a law school. If you speak to, and I used to teach in a university where we had a big law school, and my colleagues who told us said, the hard thing is not to teach someone how to memorize all the cases in the law. The hard thing is to teach them how to behave like a lawyer. Yeah? So that's the thing. It is the authority that we are looking for. And you need to keep asking yourself, what does it mean to have authority as an artist? Does it mean to wear an overcoat covered in paint, or to wear Birkenstocks and carry, 500 millimeter lens? I don't know. Some people think that they need to carry, two camera bags and tripods. But you need to figure out what is authority, and that's the first component of being a master. The second component of being a master is that you need to be able to look at your discipline critically. It's not enough to be good at what you do. You need to be able to open it apart. You need to be able to really challenge your discipline. And your discipline is photography. So it's photography that you need to be able to challenge. And I also will tell you that there is a very simple test. When you look at anyone's work, or when you hear anyone talk to you about their practice as a photographer, ask yourself, is their work challenges what photography means? If it doesn't, I think something is missing. For me, Lorenzo Lotto is a great example of a work that actually challenges what a painting means. Because of this, of the way this Mary is turning to us and making us part of the image, because of this guy in the sky, because of this cat. everything you knew about painting until this moment kind of has to be re-evaluated in the light of this, because this is different. And that is a sign of mastery. So when you encounter, and it's very easy, I think, to know when you encounter something that surprises you and challenges what you thought about photography or art until this point. And by the way, it goes without saying, but maybe things that go without saying actually need to be said. Perhaps that is very true. This is an art course. Do you agree? It is an art course. It is an art course, and it is at the same time a photography course. What is the relationship between the two? Are we artists who use photography? Are we photographers who do art? I don't have an answer to that. You need to figure it out for yourself. But one thing is certain. We are in an art school. And what does it mean to be in an art environment? Think about it. What is the difference between being in an art environment and being in a, let's say, media studies environment, or being in a documentary environment, or being in an editorial environment, or being in a commercial environment? What is the difference? Anyone has an answer to that? You need to think about it, because it's key to your practice. I will give you an answer, which you are welcome to disagree with, but I will give you the answer that I'm working with at the moment. In all the other environments, in documentary environment, in media studies environment, and I'm mentioning this because photography is sometimes taught in media studies environment as part of media studies. When you learn, you can do television studies, radio studies, photography studies. Photography can be taught in the journalism environment, or as a documentary practice, or a sociological practice. In all these instances, there are certain rules within which photography operates. Now, can you now tell what is the difference between all of this and doing photography in an art environment?
Let's go behind the rules, beyond the rules.
There are no rules. Anything goes. Okay? Anything goes. That's art. Bearded guys can fly. Yeah? You get me? You with me? Okay. That's what it means to be a master in an art school. That's why I think, it is such an exciting place. Because what can be better than being told that anything goes? Also quite scary, So, yeah, I agree. Quite terrifying. Because it's so much more comforting to have rules and to know that a photographic project consists of between 7 and 15 images, all 16 by 20 inches, with a wide border, all mounted in a particular way, all hung on the wall 60 inches from the ground, titled, and all having more or less the same perspective, the same subject, with some variations between them. That would be quite easy. Yeah, but you can also just as well do something else, be an accountant, for instance.
Daniel, I had the point of view of Russian photographer exhibition. He said, his point of view that art is what disturbs you, but what makes you comfortable calls now design. So it's just so.
Well, yeah. Also, some design doesn't make you very comfortable. Some design isn't comfortable. But no, I completely take your point. Yeah, art is not there to make you comfortable, and it's also not very comfortable to do art. Yeah. However, while Michael Gove might disagree, it is essential. It is essential, I would say, for being human. Because if being human is related to making something new, to creating something different, then art is essential, because art shows us that something different is possible. Without that, we would never know that it is possible just to sit on the cloud. And that's exactly the point of art. So you see, going back to the conversation I had today on the radio, art is not about making life prettier or more bearable. Art reminds us that what we have right now is not the end of the story, that there is something else possible, that there is something else just behind the horizon, that it's possible to have a different political order, it's possible to have different relationships, it's possible to move on. That is incredibly hopeful, that is also incredibly dangerous. And it's not by accident that oppressive political regimes, one of the first things they do is they lock down on art. You would think, if art is just a painkiller or a plaster, then why would, someone like Hitler or Stalin care about it so much? But they care about it very much, because as long as art says that there is hope for something different, fascist politics have harder time to convince us that what we have now is normal. Yeah? Art keeps reminding us that there is another logic. There is another logic possible. We can think in a different way. We can do things in a different way. We can put things together in a different order and get something new. That's one of the things we get from art. Now, somehow, all of that leads us back to the question of representation. And that will be the subject of the second half of this conversation, where I want to try to bring photography into the fold, because it was quite easy for me to start from a painting for obvious reasons. But I'm not avoiding the question of photography. I'm going to tackle it head on, I hope, in the second part. But just kind of to get a little bit one step forward in the discussion of how art can deal with the most basic structures of life. I want to show you one more image. Do you know that? Velázquez, Las Meninas, yeah? So it's hanging in the Prado in Madrid, yeah. And I think I once drove about 700 miles just to see that, and it was absolutely incredible. And then last week I read that actually the original is somewhere in Dorset. Seriously, which is a little bit typical, but somehow this is an amazing painting, and I really remember walking into this room in the Prado, and the first thing I noticed was this kind of massive beam of light coming from the wall, and only then I realized it is this painting. It had incredible pull. Maybe I'm just mythologizing, but there was something very special about this moment. And do you know that Foucault, in his wonderful book The Order of Things, his first chapter, we're going to read it in one of our Wednesday seminars, the first chapter is called Las Meninas, and over about 10 pages he discusses this painting, and he uses it to really explain how representation is turned on its head in this historical moment around the time when this painting is done. So, this is a little bit dark, you really cannot see the detail. But what we have here in this, on some level, it is a typical court painting, isn't it? It's called, Las Meninas means maidens in waiting. Yeah? So it's the maids of the court, you know, the little princess there and her maids and the dog and the servant in the background. So on some level, it is a typical court scene, almost you could say a family portrait. And painters may be living for generations doing these kind of court scenes that depict the palace and the environment and the space where it's all set, and the dresses, you know, and all the riches that come with it. Now, what Velázquez is doing here is turning it around slightly by placing himself in the image as the painter with a brush, with a canvas facing us. So, I mean, while there are many ways in which this image can be interpreted and read, and I don't want to kind of rob you of the pleasure of reading Foucault on this painting, and go and please read the first chapter in the order of things. It is in the library. It is also, actually, I put it on Moodle. You will find it in one of the weekly folders. Did you find it? Yeah? So, so again, you know, just like in the previous image of Lorenzo Lotto, we see here an artist surprising us, creating something different. Once you see Las Meninas, you can never look at a painting in the same way, because suddenly you realize that the painter is part of the painting, not outside of it, not just showing you something that happens and saying, look, you know, that's a representation of something that happens. No, the painter is right there. And where are we? Somehow both outside looking in and inside reflected in the mirror, and the whole world of representational art is suddenly turned upside down in just this moment when the painter becomes part of the painting. Yeah? So, so you see, that's the environment, that's the way of thinking in which photography has to project itself. And why? And what do you think Velázquez is saying by making himself part of the image? Well, he may be saying many things, but I just want to emphasize one. He is saying, I am the master. He is saying, I not only know my discipline and control it, I can also turn it upside down. And the only way to turn it upside down is to show the process by which it is coming to being. And by painting himself, painting this image, he makes the process of making the painting the subject of the painting and the process. And everything clashes together, like in this great collider, you know, and everything is kind of exploding in this moment when you realize that everything you thought you knew about painting is completely up for grabs. So that's the demand from you as masters, as photographers, as artists. So, and just to finish that, famously, this image by Jeff Wall. Do you know the title? Picture for Women. Do you know Jeff Wall? You know Jeff Wall, yeah. Okay, so so Jeff Wall here makes a very clear reference to Velázquez. Yeah. In what way? Because again, the artist is the artist, and the art of making the image is the image. It would be really interesting to put Velázquez and Jeff Wall side by side in the same space and ask do they really work? Do they really measure up? It is somehow often the case that photography finds it difficult to exist in a museum space. Did you notice that? I don't know if you remember a few years ago, Tom Hunter had the exhibition in the National Gallery, and I think it was the first time when they had the exhibition of photographs in the National Gallery. And Tom Hunter made this series of photographs based on paintings from the National Gallery, but also informed by the the events in Hackney. He took some crime reports from the Hackney Gazette and staged them photographically based on certain paintings. I don't know if you can. Do you know what I'm talking about? Did you see that?
Yeah.
You did, Valerie, but anyone else? No, maybe I will show it to you quickly, if possible. So what do you need?
Is represented by Cordelics now?
Sorry?
Is represented by Cordelics?
I'm not sure. So, yeah. So we stage them like this, for instance. And somehow, while they were quite interesting photographs, just the fact that they were in the National Gallery made them appear so weak. And that made me think that perhaps the gallery is maybe not the ideal environment for photography to exist. Perhaps photography needs to explore other venues, other forms, other kind of material projections. But in any case, here is an example of a photographer who thinks through what does it mean to be a master, who thinks through the process. So, just to sum it up very briefly, and then we'll have a quick break and come back. There are three components which I consider essential to mastery. One is authority. The other is a critical and reflexive approach to your medium. And the third is your ability to bring your own process into your work. By bringing your own process into your work, you bring yourself into the work, which is not the same as saying that all work needs to be autobiographical. Many people bring themselves into the work, and it's nothing to do with mastery. It is about bringing the process into the work. And when you bring the process in, then you get into something much more substantial. You leave representation behind. Representation always deals with something dead or mummified, represented as a still image. But when you deal with the process, you have something dynamic, something open-ended, something which is about work and labor. And when you have work and labor in your work, you also see how creativity happens. And then, when the process becomes part of the work, some potential to surprise, to suggest something else, also becomes an actuality. So for that reason, this image maybe is a little bit schematic. Maybe it is a bit dry. But Jeff Wall is like that. He is very dry in his work. And I think he has some absolutely fantastic images. But it's also interesting that Jeff Wall is perhaps one of the most politically minded contemporary artists. He wrote a lot about photography in terms of his politics. And I think there is some connection you can draw between mastery, politics, and the ability to bring the process of the work into the work. As you know, Jeff Wall famously stages his images very, very elaborately, but in a way that in the end, they look like a snapshot. But sometimes it takes him a whole year to set up the snapshot. Yeah. So, for instance, in this famous image. So famously, this image that he shot in Vancouver, you know that, yeah? It was in the Tate a few years ago. In order to do this image, he hired an apartment, put an advertisement in the paper for 2 young women to live in this apartment, gave them money to furnish it from, let's say, flea market and IKEA. And after they've been living there for several months, he took this photograph. Yeah? And the image itself is meticulously constructed, and it's almost like a living sculpture. Yeah? But it also looks almost like some kind of snapshot. You could also say, well, perhaps, you live in this flat with these 2 women for a while, and then you moved on, and on the last day before leaving, you took your pocket camera and took a picture as a memento. And that's what it would look like, And so this is another way in which the process is part of the work. So it's not necessarily about making yourself part of the picture. This is another example of the way the process comes in, because the work itself is a montage or is assembled over a long period of time. Yeah? Which again does something to undermine or question or take apart the whole notion of representation. So I'll finish now, and can you come back in 10 minutes?
He was referencing in that photograph.
Money.
Manet, the girl at the Folie Bergère.
Oh, Manet. Oh, yeah, of course,
Yeah,
of course.
yeah.
Yeah. I think it's true. Definitely with a bar.
Yes.
Yeah.
And her kind of expressionless, kind of contemplation.
But in the Manet, the way he brings himself in and the camera.
Yeah.
That I think is Velázquez.
Velázquez, yeah.
Well, it's all, he might say, if you ask him, none of that is true. It's just completely my own, influences whatsoever. It doesn't really matter, but I think it's just interesting the way both Velázquez and him felt the need to bring the process of making the image into the image.
Yeah.
fine.
That would be one.
That's all right. Thank you for letting me know. Are we good to go? Is everyone here? No. Okay. Okay, so really the first part of this talk was a kind of rambling introduction to the whole kind of idea of this course and to the idea of doing a master's degree. And you probably noticed that somehow one of the underpinning motives there was the relationship to representation. Yeah? And I want to spend the next hour sharpening this up a little bit. Basically through a case study, through an example. But also just by kind of making a representation a focus of our attention. The argument I want to put forward to you in the next hour is that to us as photographers, representation matters a great deal. Yeah. Now, photography is okay. Let me start from just a confession, perhaps. I'm absolutely fascinated by photography. I've been fascinated by it for many, many years. To such an extent that I wrote my PhD about it, trying to figure out what it is. But really, when I was writing this PhD, one of the things I realized that was the same question kind of was in the back of my mind since I was about 7-year-old. And when I was about 7-year-old, what happened was that my dad, my late father, he is dead now, he was an amateur photographer. He was a physicist by profession, but he was also an amateur photographer. He had this camera, Praktika, East German camera, wonderful. It had a beautiful smell. It had a kind of big leather lacquered case, and it was it had a 50mm lens. It had it was an amazing object. As a child, I was absolutely fascinated by it, and I was not allowed to touch it. If you were not brought up in a Russian family like me, you might not understand it. But it's very serious, this thing, what you are allowed to do, not allowed to do. It's a big deal. So one day, when my father was not at home, I obviously went into his room and was playing with the camera. And somehow I managed to take a picture of myself by playing. So later there was no denying that it was me messing with it. And the punishment was severe. So somehow I think there was something about this object that fascinated me endlessly, and not so much the picture that comes out in the end. There were so many other things fascinating about it. The smell, the sound it makes, the whole apparatus. Because at that time, let's say in the 70s, life was not surrounded by a lot of equipment. You had the radio, there was another factor, and that's it. There was no equipment, or no kind of complex machines that could do things, that could produce things. Or, these days when you have computers and iPads and iPhones and various kinds of cameras, it seems very normal to be surrounded by apparatuses that just do things. But then, I think the camera was really my first introduction to an autonomous, non-human being, an autonomous entity that can do things by itself. And I found that absolutely fascinating. And I think this kind of level of fascination, in a sense, still sustains my engagement with photography. I still don't really know what photography is. And because I don't know what it is, I can keep writing about it and teaching it and working with it, because it is still a kind of mystery. So for that reason, what I want to kind of spend the next hour unpacking is what photography is about. We often hear, what is the most cliched explanation of what photography is? What is the most hackneyed explanation? Even more hackneyed than that. Even more hackneyed than that.
Capture the moment.
Even more hackneyed than that. The most hackneyed and boring explanation is that it is painting with light. Yeah? I came to hate this description of photography. I think it's completely wrong. I think it's wrong on so many accounts. First, it's wrong because it presumes that there is a painter who paints with light. That's already a presumption. Who said that you need someone to paint in photography? Yeah. Then the other really annoying assumption is that it has something to do with the visual arts. So it's like painting, but not with paints, with light. And the third very annoying notion is that it's necessarily is about light. I think all of that is a kind of questionable. It's questionable that you need someone to actually do the painting or the photograph. It's questionable that it has something to do with visual arts, or that it is some kind of derivative of painting. And it's even questionable that it necessarily has something to do with light. We know that there is photography that is done, without light. You can do there are photographic images, especially, let's say, the ones transmitted by radio telescopes that use radio and not light. Or the decay of carbon particles to create an image. So there are various ways to create an image that we will, in the end, will consider photographic, that does not necessarily relate or connect it to light. You can even construct images completely artificially with a computer without using any light. And then you might ask, well, is it photography or is it not? Fine. I'm not sure. There are even painters who paint from photographs. Yeah? And, why that is not another aspect of the photograph. So all these assumptions about the notion of the painter and the painting and the light, they all kind of came to bother me. And my alternative, very tentative suggestion, which I want to unpack throughout this session, is that there is something else about photography. Photography is one of the most clear opportunities to examine how representation operates. What is representation and how it works? Now that is a really interesting question, because representation is another one of these things that we keep referring to in the everyday and know very little about. Some people will tell you that, representation is just there. Whatever we know about the world, it's through representation, as if it is a kind of gravitational field, But it's even interesting to consider that the political regime we are living in this country at least, is called, what it's called? It's called representational democracy. Yeah? So, representation seems to kind of span both the photographic image and the political environment we are in. Yeah? Our democracy is representational because we elect certain people to represent us in the parliament. Yeah? So clearly that is possible because representation has a certain status in our society. And it seems that photography is almost there to reaffirm that very status and to kind of... This relationship in itself is quite interesting to me. And I'm going to look at it in a minute. So I'm saying perhaps it's possible to say that photography is a kind of testing ground to figure out how representation works. For many photographers, that is really not a problem, or that's really the wrong question. Or maybe it's a question that never needs to be asked. There is a whole range of photographic practitioners who would find this question deeply, deeply irritating, because they will say, photography is, we know the world through photographs, because photographs are truthful representations of the world. Those photographers are called documentary photographers. They are called also tourists. They are also called wildlife photographers. They are also called war photographers. For all these kind of photographic practitioners, or people who use photography in the sciences, for instance, in medicine, in architecture, in astronomy, photography is really not a question. It is just a truthful representation of something that happened out there. However, for people who practice photography as art form, that could be different. Photography could be could have a problematic relationship to representation. Now, I asked you to read a couple of texts, and I just wanted to know how to structure this talk. Who had the chance to look at Flusser's Towards the Philosophy of Photography? Brilliant. Okay. And anyone knew this book earlier? You did, yeah?
Oh, yeah, I did the Czech version.
Okay, well, I think, please, please, please read Flusser's book. It's 100 pages. It's beautiful text, really beautiful. It has no footnotes. It's just a short essay about photography. You all really need to read it. I know in most courses, kind of the photographic Bible is considered to be Camera Lucida. Roland Barthes, Camera Lucida. You probably all read it? Yeah? Well, it's a beautiful text, as I told you. I told the first year students earlier this week, perhaps even too beautiful. It gets you, if you want to talk about photography as memory, if you want to talk about photography as nostalgia, if you want to talk about photography as archive, Camera Lucida can take you quite a long way. But if you want to question the notion of the archive, if you want to ask what is memory and what we need to take for granted to even talk about memory, Roland Barthes can take you very far, because Barthes is not interested in the process of photography. And it's interesting, how many people here read Camera Lucida? Great, okay. So you know what I'm talking about. Now, if you didn't read it, by all means, read. It's a great book to some extent. But he says there, I think it's on page 8, in the very beginning, he says, so I set out to find out what is photography. And I had 3 ways of approaching it. As a subject of photographs, as a viewer of photographs, and as a maker of photographs. However, he says there immediately, this last 3rd way was not available to me. I'm not a photographer. I'm not interested in making photographs. So I'm only looking at it from the perspective of the subject of photographs, someone who is being photographed, and a connoisseur, someone who looks at photographs for pleasure. And that's a very interesting admission that the process of making is of no interest to Barthes. He doesn't want to be behind the camera, but he also doesn't want to be in the darkroom. He doesn't want to load the film, pour the chemicals, shake 20 times and all that, dislodge the air bubbles, wash the film, fix it, stop it, dry it. He's not interested in any of that. And I think it's very telling, because when you subtract the process from photography, you really can get the idea that some objects, like your mother or Napoleon or anything else, magically translate into images, and these images have this truthful connection with the object. And Barthes even says it's like a laminated sheet of paper. The object on one side, the image on the other, you could not separate between them. However, we who went into the darkroom, we know that it's not the case. We know that it's very easy to screw it up. Yeah? If just you pour the stop before the developer, you're not going to get anything. And if you, by accident, have the developer not at 20 degrees centigrade, but at 90 degrees, you will not get an image, but you will get porridge. Yeah? We know that because we've been in the process. So we understand that this connection between the object and the image that people love to, rely on so much, it's just the outcome of very precise operations that need to be followed to the letter. And if anything gets wrong, or if anything is broken in this chain that needs to take place, you don't get an image. You don't get the famous indexical connection. Do you follow that? Yeah? Because I know I'm kind of using some terms from photographic theory. So do ask me, if, for instance, anyone here is not sure what indexical means, please, no one's supposed to know these things in advance. I'm happy to explain. But to me, that's the problem with Barthes. He is too quick to know what photography is without actually examining. And that is also the problem with all the other books that start from deciding for themselves what photography is in advance. So Victor Bergin has a famous book, Thinking Photography. You know that? You came across it? No. Maybe it's good. John Todd another structuralist, has a book. It's called The Burden of Representation. All these photography theory texts, they seem to me slightly suffering from taking for granted that photography is this one thing. It is an image of something that really happened. It is a truthful representation. But they start from that, and then they start asking, well, how can we use photography to describe social ills or injustice or ideology or institutions? And yeah, photography can do all of that. Photography is very good at describing institutions or showing you child labor or showing you colonialism, in post-colonial photography. However, in all these wonderful applications of photography, what is being forgotten is the process of photography itself, as if photography is not an institution, as if photography itself is somehow excluded from the colonial discourse and allowed to look at it from outside. Yeah? Nothing is allowed to look from outside. So, while this is a part of a longer conversation that I hope we're going to have over the next year, I want to get into it through the story of the André expedition to the North Pole. Now, the second document I asked you to read, the second piece of writing, was McCormack's essay, Remotely Sensing Affective Remains. Anyone had a chance to look at that? Yeah, thank you very much. That's great. So you will be familiar with some of the images. And I quite like this essay because it really allowed me to get into the question of the image from an unexpected perspective. Part of my own research and some of the work I was doing recently, or maybe over the last couple of years, is about the latent image. Now, do you know what is the latent image? Is it familiar to you, the term? Should I quickly explain? Yeah? Again, with the first year, we spoke about it briefly on Monday. But what is latent? Latent is another word for hidden. Yeah? And the latent image is a technical term for the image formed on the film while during the exposure. And as you know from your photographic practice, once the film is exposed, it is kept in the dark slide or in the film canister, yeah? And you need to keep it light tight, take it to your darkroom, and then develop. And once you develop it, you have an image, yeah? But before you develop it, what you have inside your canister or inside your dark slide is the latent image. Yeah? Now it's interesting how very few people actually ask themselves, what is this latent image? No one kind of stops to think, what is it about? Definitely not Bart, but none of the other people as well. Everyone just goes directly from exposure, negative. But before you go to the negative, you need to have the latent image in between. Yeah? And if you think about it, again, with the first year, we did have a chance to think about it because someone did actually bring the latent image to the class, and that was a very opposite and kind of wonderful coincidence. But latency, in my reading, is essential part of what makes photography so powerful as an art form and so fascinating, because photography has this hidden element about it. You can never completely rid it of something hidden. Yeah? Because the latent image is really it's not an image as such, because there is nothing to see, it's hidden. Yeah? But that's where the object touched the film through light, through the medium of light, for instance, touched the film and made an imprint, like an imprint on the sand. So the imprint is there in the dark slide. Now, you cannot open and have a look, because the moment you look in, light will enter the slide and the image will get exposed and destroyed. Yeah. So this footprint, this mark, is only there as long as the image is hidden. If you make it visible by developing it, you get an image, but you destroy the mark. That's the price of visibility. Visibility always kills the actual presence. Yeah? That's what general theory of photography wants you to forget. It wants you to believe that presence is sustained in the image. But it's not. It's destroyed in the process of developing. What was there in the film, we will never know. You might say, oh, well, but we trust our scientific process to chemically develop the changed molecules of silver, the silver halides, and get exactly the same thing in the negative. Perhaps. That brings a whole big load of questions about the scientific method and how far you trust it and the consequences of kind of that Trojan horse. But if you think about it poetically, there is something unspoken or invisible or hidden, which is the essential aspect of photography. Yeah. Now, Derrida, you know Derrida, the French philosopher. Yeah. He doesn't talk about photography, but he speaks about writing, and he speaks about the différent. And by that he means the original trace. And he says before there can be any symbol or any utterance, there had to be an original trace which gets erased and forgotten, but without which no symbol is possible. So he kind of asks a very classic question that Plato was asking already in his story of the cave in the Republic and in the very wonderful and mysterious dialogue Timaeus. He was asking, how is it possible to go from an object to an image? How this transition is possible? How can you go from one state of things, which is physical, three-dimensional, into something else, which is two-dimensional and flat? You have to go through, somehow the object has to give birth to the image. And giving birth involves going through a womb, going through something dark, something hidden, like the cave. If you know the story of the cave in the 7th book of the Republic. But we will talk about these things in greater detail. So even if you're not familiar with any of that, these things will come back. I just want to kind of plump into your practice and into your minds this thought that not everything is transparent about photography. Not everything is crystal clear. It's not, something obvious. Yes?
May I ask, what is a hidden image in digital photography?
Well, in digital photography, the hidden image is the data which the sensor captures and the algorithm needs to develop. Yeah, but that's for the second semester. There will be a series of lectures or seminars we will do, and it will be called the digital condition. And we will look very carefully. I don't know if you know the kind of stuff I was writing. I wrote quite a lot about the algorithmic image, and I'm actually much more interested in the digital image than in the analog, philosophically. But I stay now with the analog image, not because I think that's the real photography, but because I think once we kind of figure out the poetics of the analog image, it will be much easier for us to find this poetics elsewhere. And what I'm really trying to do here is to tell you, look, the reason photography can make a claim to being an art form, it's not because it can just make a picture. Many things can make a picture. it can make a claim to being an art form because it has something mysterious about it. You know, photography has a kind of secret. That's why it's art. That's why it is poetic. Yeah? If it didn't have that, I don't think we would be here doing this thing we do now. Okay, so let's just go to my example, interrupt me, ask questions, but I want to speak to you about the story of the Andrée expedition to the North Pole. As I said, I've been thinking about the latent image for quite a while, and I found this, which I take as a little case study. Yeah. Now, the story of Andrée expedition is fascinating, tragic, and very, very sad. And basically, it's like that. The end of the 19th century was a kind of a race to the North Pole. Everyone wanted to get there. The Norwegians, the Russians, the English, the Swedish. But the Swedes, they had a particular desire to get there because they felt that the Norwegians are about to go there first. And getting to the North Pole was incredibly difficult. Now, if you know anything about the history of these expeditions, generally what would happen is that you will take a bunch of bearded guys and a lot of dogs with sledges, and you will drive to the North Pole from the last point at which you could get by boat. You would drive to the North Pole, and as you would drive forward, you will run out of food and provision because it's only that much you can carry. You will start killing the dogs one by one, eating the dogs, feeding the dogs to the other dogs, moving to the North Pole like that. You know, by the end of the day, you get there with one or two dogs left. You plant your little flag in the North Pole, and then you go back and you die on the way back. That's how it was done. That was the respectable way of doing it. So, in 1893, in Sweden, there was this engineer, Andrée, and he'd been in the States earlier, and he experimented with hot air balloons, and he had a wonderful idea to fly in a balloon from here, which is kind of the the northern edge of Sweden, to fly in this balloon towards the North Pole, a specially constructed balloon. As he thought it would take about 3 weeks of flying, passing over the North Pole to drop the flag with a little weight, carry on to either Siberia or Canada, wherever the wind takes, put on your fineries and go to have a reception with the king. That was the idea. And amazingly, he managed to convince some very important people to invest in this project. Alfred Nobel, the inventor of dynamite and the person who set up the Nobel Prize, actually funded this project. So they went to Paris, where they were very good at building balloons, and they built a massive helium balloon for 3 people, Andrée and 2 of his comrades. One of them was a photographer. And at some point in the summer, they departed. Now, part of the plan, and this is really important for this kind of way of thinking, they took a lot of photographic equipment with them. They took cameras specifically designed to do aerial photography. Now, on the balloon, once you are in the air, you have a really wonderful view of the terrain, perfect for mapping. Yeah. So these cameras were equipped with specific dials that you could set up the latitude and altitude. So whenever you take an exposure, the parameters of latitude and altitude would be engraved on the image. Yeah. So this is their approach to photography, was as representational as could be. Photography here really was the way by which the landscape is being mapped. And what you need to understand here is that photography here is not just the proof that the journey is taking place. It's also the mapping of the territory. It's very political. Once the territory is being mapped, other people can follow, because then you have a map. When you have a map, you can conquest the territory. So photography really here is an extension of the political force of the state. So the whole force of rational thinking, of the imperialist drive to conquer, map, survey, occupy, is kind of encapsulated in this way of thinking about photography as the main vehicle by which this terrain will become part of the Swedish Empire. Yeah? So it's very important to realize that they didn't take photography with them to bring back pretty pictures. It was not about snapshots of wildlife or of iceberg. It was really strategically important to the whole enterprise as a way of mapping the territory. Yeah? So it's almost like the whole ideology, the whole Western idea of the man as the conqueror of space, the man as the man, and it's important it's the man, yeah, and the white man in the white continent, coming in with the camera, and it is the photographing of the terrain that actually makes it yours. Yeah, photography here is really an extension of the possessive drive, of the Western possessive drive. So I'm emphasizing these things so you will understand what is at stake in representation in this reading. Do you follow? Yeah? You remember how earlier I said that representation is both kind of part of our aesthetics and also part of our politics, because we talk about representational democracy. And in this example of the André journey, you can see how the photographic representation is also political, because it's about mapping, it's about making it your own, it's about conquering. So all the people who talk to you about, for instance, the post-colonial discourse, that's how they understand photography. And it has this aspect, there's no denying it. In this expedition is exceptional in the way photography is completely embedded in it. Without photography, that probably would not even get funded, because that was the main drive behind the whole enterprise. And it's very important also that once you are in the balloon, you have this incredibly wide perspective on things. Kind of photography gets even more powerful when you look at things from above. So, clearly it didn't end very well. Otherwise I wouldn't be telling you this story. So they set up. Here they are. That's the one with the bunny ears is the photographer, Stenberg. And the one with the funny hat is Andre.
Sorry, which funny hat?
The yellow one. Obviously the yellow, because he is the most important one, so he has the biggest hat. So that's part of their equipment that was later recovered. Yeah, and maybe before we go into that, let me just tell you what happened quickly. So they departed. No one before ever spent more than a few hours in a balloon. No one had an overnight flight in the balloon. It was a mad idea from the start. I guess it was one of these things that, they kind of acquire their own logic. You start from a kind of idea, but then some people believe in it. Some people give you money. The king shakes your hand and says, "Oh, well done. You will do Sweden very proud." And after a certain point, there is no way of turning back. you will just lose face. What will you say? You know, it was really, sorry, it was stupid. So it looks to me that when they knew it's not going to end well, when they departed, 3 weeks in a balloon, you know, after about 3 days, they started to lose height, and eventually they landed somewhere there on the 14th of July, you know, after zigzagging. They landed on a sheet of ice. They were not in the North Pole, but not very far. And once they landed and they looked around, they just saw sheets of ice and nothing else. White below and white above, nothing else. Now, they were planning to spend basically 3 weeks eating roast chicken and drinking port, and they didn't really prepare for living on the ice. So they wore like some kind of army trousers and some kind of boots, and they had some kind of cotton socks and woolen socks and a few pairs of gloves. They really were not equipped for the kind of environment they found themselves in. Nevertheless, they had a lot of equipment with them: guns, sledges, boats, loads of ammunition, stoves, loads of things, because this balloon was quite enormous. So they really took kind of the best their civilization could produce with them, and lots and lots of food. So they began their journey back on foot, on the sledge, with a boat. And as you see, that's what we got on the 12th of September. Ultimately, they managed by the 6th of October to reach this point here, the White Island in Sweden. But it's an uninhabited island, and the winter, the Arctic winter was approaching, and they all died, frozen to death. Okay, so no one knew what happened to them, because once they departed, they had a couple of post pigeons they sent on the first day, saying, "Oh, the atmosphere is great, and they were in high spirits," and then they disappeared, never came back, and there was a mystery. What happened to them? And no one knew. But 30 years later, in 1933, some kind of stray shipping boat, whaling boat, stopped at the White Island for some reason. A couple of people went off the boat and found the remains, found the little hut and the skeletons of 3 people and the remains of their equipment, preserved pretty well because, it's always ice, so things don't decay. And that was more than 30 years, 35 years after the expedition. And the remains were brought back to Sweden, and there was a massive funeral procession, and they were considered heroes and all of that. So you see, the kind of the scientific mindset, the chronometers. And by the way, it's quite interesting for those of you who think about doing the project on duration. It's quite interesting how this approach to measurement was so important to this expedition. Field glass, compass, speedometer, watches, chronometer, and another chronometer. So, measuring was so important in terms of accuracy and precision and mapping, all of that. That's what makes this whole project, this whole Andrea expedition, really, to me, the clearest example of representation in action. Representation as a political mission, to represent the North Pole, to bring it back, not in terms of samples of minerals, for instance, but to bring back a representation of this of the white continent. So conquest will be possible. Yeah. Okay. So why am I telling you all this story? Because among their remains on the island, there were 5 exposed rolls of film. Yeah, they had many cameras with them. 5 rolls of exposed films manufactured in 1888 or something like that by Kodak. Kind of more or less like our medium format, in a paper with a paper wrapper. 5 exposed rolls and another several unexposed. Now it's actually quite fascinating, the whole process of how they were developed. And someone wrote a PhD about that. And he wrote it in University of Westminster. I have all the details, and I can bring it up if it's interesting. But the whole story is great. Even if you just go to the Wikipedia and read about the Andre expedition, you will find quite a lot of information about it. As far as I know, this is the longest known case of latent images. Yeah. So these images, these exposed films, yeah, that's what we call latent images. Does it make sense? Yeah? It's the exposed film before development. So once it was all brought and very carefully thawed in Sweden, and then someone did some developing experiments and found the chemistry that actually could deal with that, and developed it. It transpired that actually, after they landed on this sheet of ice, they kept taking photographs. And these are the photographs that make, to me, this story so poetically relevant to photography. That's, by the way, it's a very low resolution image, so it was not as pixelated in real life. But that's one of the cameras. As you see, it's a stereoscopic camera. Yeah. Why is it important? Why is it important to stereoscopic? It just shows you how representational accuracy was fundamental for this enterprise. Yeah. Because in stereoscopy, stereoscopy is very important for aerial photography because you get much more accurate representation of the landscape. So that's the camera. These are some of the exposed and unexposed rolls of film that were recovered and brought back to Stockholm. And this is one of the most famous images from this story. Now, you really need to get into the mindset of people who crash land on a sheet of ice. And as you see, there's not really much to go by. And then saying, guys, hold on a second, we really must take a picture of that. Now, I'm pretty sure that if something like that happened now, people will do the same thing, but it will just be uploaded to Facebook. So if there was a Wi-Fi signal in the Arctic, and then what? And then you change your status to stranded. But it's amazing, don't you think? Isn't it amazing? Because once you land, just think about it. Think about is there something more lonely than finding yourself in this white environment? When it's wherever you look, it's white, and there is nothing else but white. It's white on the ground, and it's white in the sky, and there is no horizon line because it's just all white. That's the Arctic. So that's where you take the picture, and that's one. The person needs to stand with the camera. The 2 others are by the balloon. And that was developed after these 33 years. So, now that's another one. That's Andre posing next to a white bear he managed to kill with a rifle. And you can see that they are really dressed as if they are they went on a Sunday stroll somewhere around Stockholm. In some kind of riding trousers and a coat, and probably even without gloves or something like that. You can also start seeing here how everything they brought with them, the chronometers, the clocks, the compasses, all this representational apparatus, is suddenly completely useless. It was only useful as long as you were the extension of the representational society of the empire that sent you forward to conquer, to kind of, as long as you felt the inseparable cord that connects you to the mechanisms of knowledge, of rationality, of logic, of, even the most basic optical device we have in our possession, the horizon line, without which we really are lost. Even that is absent, because it's all just white. There's no point anymore asking where is above and where is below, because it's all the same. Yeah? And this is a very important experience, because that's where you realize that actually, even vision, our vision that we so rely on, to find our place in the universe, to know if we are the right side up or upside down, to just know, where to point the camera, to know how representation works. Even vision is just very subjective and very much dependent on living in an environment where you have a horizon. In a place when there is no horizon, seeing is much less important because there is nothing to see. You need kind of a different device to deal with the landscape. It's a little bit like moving to a completely different continent in Aboriginal art. In Australia, I read about it in a beautiful article by Barbara Bolt about painting in the Australian desert. And she was saying how when you sit in the Australian desert with a canvas and you paint, you realize that the Western traditions of, sky below, land above, the horizon, dividing it, and, it doesn't help. It's all the same, and it's hot. And Aboriginal art is not representational. It's not about drawing what you see, because you don't see. You work in a different way. You look at your feet. You look at where you step. And then most Aboriginal art is a kind of dot paintings that go in circles. Do you know what I'm talking about? No? Now, this is just an example how it's possible to step out of the representational environment we are so used to in the Western society into another environment when different logic operates, when the logic of representation that relies on vision, on horizon, on clarity, does not apply. You need a different logic. You need something else, because clearly what you used to does not work. So the question I have in the back of my mind is, how come you continue taking photographs when you know that you're never going to see them developed? When you know that it's not about coming back? I mean, you might still believe that you come back, but yeah, of course, we could say, look, until the last moment they clung to the belief that they will come back, and then these will be wonderful trophies from the journey. They will put them on the piano, they will show it to the children, they will sell them to the newspapers. Yeah, we could say that. We can apply our representational logic to these images to explain them rationally. It will work. But I want to suggest to you a more poetic reading. Maybe not rational, yeah? A different logic. Remember how in the first session I told you art is about allowing us to think about things differently. It's about recovering something poetic, maybe something absurd. So I want to offer you an absurd way of thinking about it. And my absurd way is that at this point in their journey, the representational framework collapses. It's no more. There is no going back. You are in a different environment in which you will live for a while and you will die and you will perish. And the question is, what is now? How do you keep yourself unified, homogenized, as a little black dot in the big, white, snowy, cold, alien environment. And I think at that point, photography is not about the picture you will get in the end, because you're not going to get a picture in the end. It is really about the latent image, the hidden image. That what becomes important, because who is hidden now? Who is now hidden? They are hidden. They are little black dots in a big white space. They are completely alone, completely hidden. It could be that when you detach yourself from civilization, when you become hidden, the hidden image, the latent image, becomes your expression. Because it's not anymore about something you can look at in the end. This image now operates in a different, according to a different logic. Maybe a very desperate logic, but it's one that is not about representation anymore. Yeah. Now you might say that it's fanciful. You might say that, and it is fanciful. I approach it in the same way I approach the plays of Samuel Beckett, Waiting for Godot, absurd theater. You know, the theater of the absurd is very much about breaking down the conventions of representation, escaping the narrative structures of traditional theater. It's about using the stage to make something that does not make sense. So I'm presenting you something that does not make sense. Yeah. So if you come and tell me that my explanation does not make sense, it's right. It doesn't make sense. Which is not to say that it is senseless. It is to say that it makes a different sense, another sense. And the question is not which sense is right and which sense is wrong. The point is that several senses are possible. Yeah? So the sense I want to suggest to you about regarding this image is that photography now is not about the picture you will get in the end. It is about the act of photography itself. So there is something else about photography besides the image that is still important, still of value. And maybe you need to kind of detach yourself from the representational order of Western, rational, representational society. You know, you need to detach yourself from the clocks and the microscopes and the binoculars. And at that point, when you are really nomadic, you know, nomadic meaning without an attachment to a particular place, a wanderer, a homeless person, because you know they are homeless. You know, they are homeless and hidden. And when you are homeless and hidden, it is not the print in the end that photography promises, but it's the hidden image that becomes your image. And it is, that's another one of these absolutely stunning photographs. Neil Strindberg, he was the photographer who actually made it. So these are all around the crash landing site. This is a kind of close-up of the balloon. And you see the necking of the balloon. And this is quite surprising, isn't it? Because that's them setting camp on the floating ice sheet. Well, that's their boat with a sledge, the kind of sledge boat. That's their tent, kind of a pitiful tent setting up camp. And obviously the camera is on a tripod and with a time release, because there were only 3 people there. Yeah. And so it's a kind of group portrait. And perhaps the most, which one I want to go to? The most, for me, amazing image of all is this one. Because you understand what actually is this journey that took them 2 months, what it entailed. Yeah, the ice is not some kind of smooth surface like when you go to a skiing resort that you can glide on. It's like a rocky, snowy environment. And here they are pushing this boat loaded with their guns and ammunition and their equipment and their cameras. Yeah? Because clearly they jettisoned everything they could to make this journey easier. They threw it overboard. They just took the essentials. And the cameras are with them. And they put the camera on a tripod to take a picture of them pushing this boat through this rocky landscape. And how else can you make sense of that if not as a kind of example of the absurd? Yeah? This is absurd. I mean, why would you do that? Who would do that when you are in that kind of situation? Wouldn't it be logical to first of all get rid of the camera? I mean, you cannot eat it. It doesn't warm you. It just, it's not a walk in the park. Clearly, pushing, 150 kilograms on a sledge through rocks of ice is the worst punishment you can imagine, when your hands get glued to the metal of the boat. If you've ever been at kind of extreme cold, you know what it's like when whatever you touch with your hands just sticks to it, and when you pull your hand off, then some of your flesh is being is left on the metal, and you do all that, and you keep your photographic equipment, and you put the camera on the tripod to take a picture of and and it's not like I said, oh, that's okay because they will come soon with a helicopter and will take it. Nothing. You know that it's not going to happen. Yeah. So what logic you need to make sense of that? And I want to suggest that maybe not the logic of representation that we so easily always go to make sense of things, but a different logic, a kind of absurd, poetic, wild, untamed logic is at work here. Something is happening in this image that we cannot understand. As long as we think representationally, as long as we think in the linear fashion of the logical creatures that we are, that we're supposed to be, that doesn't make any more sense than Lorenzo Lotto flying guy in the sky. That is just as absurd. Yeah? I really want you to use that to really see that there is something strange going on there. Yeah? And this strangeness is to do with photography. And it's interesting, that they were not the only explorers of the Arctic and the Antarctic for whom the photographic apparatus was something they kept, even in the worst possible conditions. In the Antarctic, which the expeditions to the South Pole, what's her name? Catherine Yusuf wrote about it beautifully. There were expeditions that people were at a stage when they ate all their dogs, and what happens when you eat these dogs is that you eat dog liver, and you have a vitamin A poisoning, a vitaminosis, and this vitamin A poisoning also makes you mad and insane. So the story there is the is that there are two people only left from they ate all the dogs. There are two of them left. One of them is really kind of dying in agony. He tells the other, "Tell me if I'm a man or a dog." And it's so cold that your limbs just break off, and he breaks a finger, breaks one of his fingers, and starts chewing it. And that's the situation they are in, and they keep pushing, and then he dies. And then the last one keeps going on. And he still carries the films. He still carries the films. And he did manage to survive and was rescued. And, you know, in an environment where you lose all sense of identity, you lose all sense of self, it's very hard just, not to become completely dissolved or devoured by the landscape. You still stick to this photography, and I don't think it's because you really want to bring a picture back as a trophy from a holiday.
May I ask?
Yeah.
Is it possible that photography is the last hope for them? It's kind of if they don't bring any fixation or photograph, all the enterprise is lost its sense.
Yeah, it is possible.
Could be this the last rational thing in there.
It could be the last rational thing, yeah, but it's absolutely possible. But I think there is something else there. Catherine Yusuf, the way she writes about it, and you should look at it. It's really well written. I will upload the essay. She says, in this white landscape, the real challenge is just not to get dissolved, to somehow stay as a little black dot in this space of white, and it could be that photography somehow allows you, the photographic apparatus somehow allows you to keep yourself together, and maybe here it is the exposure that is more important than the image. And it's interesting how exposure to cold is also called exposure, yeah? Northern exposure, yeah? So when you have frostbite, we call it exposure, yeah? So it could be that we are here in a kind of environment where the photographic exposure becomes more important than the photographic image. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because we so quickly think about photography in terms of the end result, which is the picture. And we forget something really important about photography, without which photography cannot even exist. And that is the exposure. Yeah? Could we try to say that it is possible that what is really fascinating about photography is the exposure, and the image is just an afterthought? It's like what is more important, the shell or the nut? Yeah. And I was just thinking the other day how to explain it in an image. This our preference to the picture over the exposure. And I thought, well, it's almost like if you would imagine someone walking barefoot in the sand, and you know how when you walk you leave marks in the sand. Someone, making a footprint and then stopping and looking at the footprint very carefully and examining it in great detail, and then taking another one and examining that, and forgetting that it is really not about the footprint, but it is about the process of going somewhere. Yeah? It's really about the movement, but we keep thinking about the footprint, forgetting that is only one part of what is going on. Could it be that photography is not at all, or maybe not, at least not completely, about the image, that there is something else there, and this something else has something to do with exposure and with latency. Yeah? And maybe it's not the case at all, but at least what I would like you to think is to allow photography to have more than just one dimension. Yeah? It's very sad to think that photography is just about the image. Because everything else is allowed to have more dimensions than one. For instance, you know how in the entrance into this building there are these fountains, the 4 fountains. I like them very much because to me they really tell me about something that is missing from photography. But these fountains, they are a visual spectacle. Yeah, there's a lot to look at. Yeah? But you could also turn away, and they are still a spectacle because they still make a sound, and a very rhythmic, particular sound. Yeah. Now, couldn't we allow photography to also have more than one dimension? If the bloody fountain can have them, you know, why can't photography have something more than just the image? Can't we say that when you turn away from the image, you still can hear the exposure, you still can hear the latent image? You know, because I think if we don't allow photography to have this multiplicity, we will never allow it to become an art form. Art is born out of the tension between different dimensions. For instance, why language can be art? Why language can be both a document and data and poetry? Because in language there is always tension between information, for instance, statements that can be true or false. This chair is on the floor. That is a true statement. You know, there is a unicorn in this room. This is a false statement. So there are these kind of statements. And yet there is another dimension. There are intonations. Yeah? You can say something in a whispery voice, or you can say something as a command, as an order. You can beg, and you can express it in your voice. So all these things have nothing to do with whether a statement is true or false, but the language can contain other dimensions of emotion, of expression, of sense, of feeling. And because the language is allowed to have this multiplicity of truth and false, but also various other aspects of expression, for that reason it is capable of poetry. For that reason, it is also capable of philosophy. Now, I want to put to you, very gently, that photography is not different in that sense. Photography also has several dimensions to it. It's not just a representation which is either true or false. If it was just that, it would be incapable of poetry. To be poetic, you need to have several dimensions and you need to be able to play between them. So the fountain has it, the fountain outside the building, and think about it every time you come into the building. Look at the fountain and think, that photography also has these various dimensions. This building has several dimensions. Yeah? It is a structure. It's also an image. Yeah? It says something to you just by the way it is built. It creates certain flows and connections and energies by the way it is organized. Yeah? And that's apart from the fact that it is a shelter and a structure and a construction. So there's a multiplicity of affects that is allowed to coexist within this architectural structure. I'm asking you to look for that multiplicity, for that riches in photography, because it is there. And in the great works of art, we see that. For instance, again, apologies, that's another one of these amazing images when they do a kind of still life or something like that, which it's almost like a nod to surrealism here, don't you think? Because it says here, we photographed the story of the development of our forks. I made the fork for Frankfurt. and that's from the diary. Yeah. So that is the fork he made for Frankel from a piece of wire. Yeah. Now this, if this is not the absurd, because I really don't know what absurd is. So that's one fork, another fork, and a third fork. No? So and that's the remains. That's Andre and his diary, and more of the cameras. Now, what I wanted just to finish on is again with the first here we looked at it, and that will be. Maybe.
Take out water, actually, just try to silver.
Okay, I think Arizona desert, and then it will be maybe something like. Oh, yeah, Volta de Maria, yes, of course, yes. Volta de Maria, yes. Right, now we should get it. Yeah, so this is, to me, an example of what photography can do when it is not bound to the notion of the image. Because that's Walter de Maria installed hundreds of metal rods in the ground in the Arizona desert. And on a stormy night, these rods attract lightning. And if you're lucky enough to be there, you sit there and just watch hundreds of these lightning bolts hitting the ground. So each one is an exposure. And so all we have here is just the exposure. So I think that is a very interesting example of photography that steps away from the image and finds itself in something that cannot be really archived or represented, but can only be experienced. So this is an example of photography that takes you into the present moment, into the now. Because, photography has this kind of problem with the now. It's always about something that was there, something about the past. Roland Barthes famously says about that photography is, he calls it, that was there. And that's very well. But what about the now? What about the present? The experience of being here in this moment. What can photography tell us about that? Because if we just rely on representation and on picture, it will always be about the past. That's very well if you want to live in the past. But what if you want to live in the present? How you inhabit the present in photography? How you inhabit the present in any way? One of the things we're going to do in the Wednesday seminars is precisely look at the various approaches contemporary philosophical thought has around inhabiting the present moment, being in the present. The argument goes basically that the Western tradition, in its whole trajectory from the Greeks to the present moment, privileged rationality and representation and scientific thinking, and through that achieved great things that cannot be denied, such as building the atomic bomb and destroying the planet and also flying to the moon and all these things. So that's all great. But all that carries a certain price with it. And the price is forgetting how to be in the present moment. And what was the word you used yesterday for the nothing?
The Sanskrit word?
Yes.
Shunyata.
Shunyata. Yeah. Forgetting this, the shunyata, the present moment. The present moment is not something that can be represented, but it's the moment of intuition. It's the moment of the experience itself. It's also the moment where the process is happening. So, okay, let me just draw some conclusions here and maybe some kind of indication where to go from here. Well, what I presented to you in this second half is really my research into the latent image, into the present of photography. The question that interests me is, what is the photographic image? And the answer I'm kind of entertaining at the moment is that the photographic image is hidden, is latent, is kind of invisible. And the example of Andre allows me to think through the invisible image. The invisible image, of course, it's very hard to pin down, and you can immediately tell me, yeah, but look at you. You talk to us about the invisible image, but how? You show us pictures. Yeah? So, where is the invisible image? Well, I cannot show it to you. I can only take you towards it and not an inch further. But I can kind of maybe try to get you sense its presence. Not see it, but just sense it. We are leaving the visual here. We are entering something else. We are entering something affective at that moment. And I feel quite confident in doing that, because we are surrounded by a lot of art which is not dealing with representation. If you walk into the Tate Modern, you see that the whole history of the 20th century art is about what is happening outside of representation. What is happening when you leave the world of rationality behind? And how can you inhabit these spaces that open up when you step away from the rational? You see that in music, for instance, atonal music that wants to step outside of the chromatic scales and outside of harmonies, outside of kind of classical rhythms, into something that does not really make sense according to the logic of classical composition. And yet, it somehow still does. Yeah, so, think about Stockhausen, for example. Stockhausen, the modernist composer, who wrote an opera for 4 helicopters. It's very interesting. So, think about, for instance, modern ballet or modern dance, that again steps outside of the human body as representing something. For instance, in the classical ballet, in Swan Lake or something like that, the body is telling a story. But in modern dance, the body is not telling a story. The body is just the body in movement. Is the body inhabiting the state of being a body. Yeah? So, what interests me is to find the equivalent of that in the photographic image. The equivalent of photography which is just allowed to be photography. Not a picture of anything in particular, but just to be the photographic. Yeah? And I think we actually, there's more of that than we think. And especially so when we start to think about the digital image and the online environment. And that's something that we will leave for another occasion. But it's quite clear that if we try to figure out what is happening to photography online, what is happening to photography on iPads and iPhones and screens and Facebook and social media, the traditional notions of representation are not really enough. Yeah, because it is quite clear that there is something representational about these images, but also something very unrepresentational. For instance, I take a picture of my cat and I upload it, as I do every day, and I upload it to Facebook. Okay, so it's a picture of a cat. You can say on Facebook you have a representation of your cat. Fine, I can go with you that up to here. But then this picture is available everywhere at once, in all parts of the world, on all computers that are connected to the web, instantly. So the traditional rules of time as being kind of linear and of space as being three-dimensional don't seem to apply at all. Instead, we have some kind of multiplicity and instantaneity. And that doesn't really fit with traditional notions of photography as a representation of something that happened in the past. It shows like we're already in a sort of different environment. So it looks to me that's why it's quite important to try to ask really probing, really difficult questions about the photographic image in order to try and figure out how it sits with contemporary life that we inhabit. Just to try to ask, how is it? What is happening with photography? How is it with the image? It is quite amazing to me that we encounter images everywhere, both in physical world and online, and we keep thinking about them in the same kind of representational, aesthetic, rational way, often forgetting to wonder, about the immense complexity that allows these images to exist sometimes on screens, And where is the image when the screen is switched off? Where does it go? Does it go to sleep? And is it somewhere or is it nowhere? If it's somewhere, then is it still an image? Is it something else? I'll stop. Thank you very much. Sorry?
Just 1 or 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Sometimes whenever we can talk. Because
You want to have a chat?
yes.
Later on, I'm going to meet Valerie, and then I can talk with you.
Sure.
So Dad, I was thinking,
Yeah.
I was thinking about Ramsha. I'm sure. Well,
Do you want to talk here or you want to go upstairs?
last time here, I just wanted to think about. I think I'm going to try and get my head around it on my own.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?